How many times have you spent hours on Amazon or YouTube just to buy something very simple? You start comparing every single option, prices, reviews, features, until you're drowning in tabs. And then after hours of research, you're still undecided. Well, the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard actually had a name for this. He called it the dizziness of freedom. Too many possibilities, too many choices lead us to an existential anxiety, and we are paralyzed. After years of studying philosophy as a PhD and suffering from the dizziness on a professional level, I finally trained myself to make one impossible choice. In this video, I'll pick for you the 5 greatest philosophers of all time. So let's start with the first philosopher on the list, Plato. Now, Plato is basically the founding father of philosophy as we know it. And as thinkers, we are all his children. Of course, before him you had all the pre-Socratics asking crazy questions like what is everything made of? Air, water, infinite bananas. But Plato takes all the raw curiosity and transforms it into something bigger, a unified vision of reality, one that touches justice, truth, the soul, politics, knowledge, basically everything. Plato's worst enemies are not the pre-Socratics, they are actually the sophists. Now the sophists were basically the influencers of the ancient Athens. For a nice fee, they teach you how to win arguments, sound smart in public, and climb the social ladder. Truth, justice, that was just secondary. What really mattered was persuasion. If you could talk well enough, you could make anything sound true. Imagine like an ancient TED Talk mixed with modern day life coaching with a heavy price tag. Plato absolutely hated this. For him, the sophists turned philosophy into a game of appearances, a marketplace of opinions. And that's exactly what pushed him to do the opposite, to search not for what sounds true, but for what is true. That's where his big idea comes in, the second voyage. The first voyage is when we drift along with the senses or with opinions, like the pre-Socratics do. But Plato says that's not enough. The senses deceive us, opinions change with crowd. If we really want to know, we need to set sail again with a different boat, the boat of reason. And that's how we reach the world of ideas. Invisible, eternal realities that give shape and meaning to everything we see. These ideas are not just in our head. Of course, it's hard for us children of Descartes to understand it. But for Plato, these ideas are real. Justice, beauty, goodness are eternal realities that never change, even if human beings keep messing it up. This Plato's idea changes completely the normal way of looking at the world. It means truth isn't whatever the majority decides, and it isn't up to the whims of power. Truth has its own existence, even when people try to corrupt it or distort it. And this is where Plato's influence explodes far beyond philosophy. Christianity inherits so much from him. The idea that this world isn't the ultimate reality, but only a shadow of a higher truth, for example, or the separation of the body and soul, or the conviction that there is an eternal good beyond time which guides us and redeems us. When Augustine of Hippo, one of the most important Christian thinkers, reads Plato, he basically says, finally philosophy that points to God. Without Plato, Christianity as a philosophical and theological system would look radically different today. But Plato didn't just dream up abstract ideas. He built powerful images to make them unforgettable. The most famous is in the Republic, the so-called allegory of the cave. Imagine human beings chained in a cave, forced to look only at a wall. Behind them, shadows flicker from objects passing in front of a fire. And those shadows are all they know. That's us, says Plato, when we trust only our senses and opinions. But if someone breaks free and climbs out of the cave, he is blinded at first by the light. Slowly, he will see reality, the objects, the sky, finally the sun itself, the source of all light, the symbol of the good. It's one of the most striking metaphors in history. Our ordinary life is a cave of shadows, and philosophy is the journey upward toward the truth. And Plato doesn't stop there. In the Republic, he dares to imagine a city ruled by those who've made the journey, philosophers, who've seen the truth and can orientate society toward it. It's the first great political utopia. Whether you agree with him or not, every discussion we have today about justice, democracy, or the role of truth in politics still echoes Plato. And this is why Plato still matters. He wasn't just spinning abstract theories, he was building a compass for life. Philosophy, with Plato, stops being a clever pastime. It becomes a way of orientating your whole existence. If Plato is the guy pointing up at the sky saying truth lives in eternal ideas, then Aristotle is the brilliant student who nods politely and says, "Sure, teacher, but maybe we should actually look around us first." That's Aristotle's genius. Where Plato wanted us to escape the cave and gaze at the heavens, Aristotle starts with the world right here. The plants, the animals, the stars, the way people live together. He wants to study reality in all its details, and he does it with an almost obsessive rigor. He invents logic, the first formal system for reasoning. He also writes the first real works of biology and zoology, carefully describing and classifying living beings. He analyzes politics, ethics, poetry, physics. Honestly, it feels like he wrote about everything, and in a way, he did. For centuries, people simply called him the philosopher. But his revolution isn't just in scope, it is in method. Aristotle insists that knowledge has to start from experience, from what we can see, touch, and analyze, and then rise to causes and principles. This is the seed of the scientific method. Without Aristotle, the whole tradition of empirical science, from Galileo to Newton to modern biology, would be unimaginable. And his impact doesn't stop there. In the Middle Ages, when his works were rediscovered in Europe, the entire university system was basically rebuilt around him. Thomas Aquinas and Christian theology leaned heavily on Aristotle to explain faith through reason. For over 1,000 years, to study philosophy meant simply to study Aristotle. Aristotle is also important because he literally invented metaphysics, the study of what comes after physics. The ultimate questions of being. Why do we exist? What makes the substance what it is? How do we explain motion and change? And so on. And this leads him to one of his most fascinating ideas, the so-called unmoved mover. Everything in the universe is in motion, and every motion has a cause. But this cannot go forever, otherwise we'd never get started. So there must be a first cause. Something that moves everything else without itself being moved. For Aristotle, this wasn't a personal god like a Christian one, but pure actuality, the eternal principle that gives order to the cosmos. Centuries later, theologians like Thomas Aquinas would grab this idea and say, "Perfect, that's God." But maybe Aristotle's most timeless idea is that man is a political animal. For him, indeed, human beings can't live in isolation. We fulfill our nature only in community. According to him, ethics and politics are inseparable. The good life is the one lived together, aiming at virtue. This is why his thought still underpins modern debates about democracy, citizenship, and the common good. So, Aristotle's fingerprints are everywhere. The medieval university system was basically built on his books. Christian theology used him to reconcile faith and reason. Scientists inherited his obsession with observation and classification. And his politics still echo everywhere. So if Plato gave us the vision of eternal truths, Aristotle gave us the toolbox for dealing with reality. He grounded philosophy in logic, method, and experience. And he never stopped asking how all this knowledge could make life better. And this is why he's not just a philosopher. He's the ancestor of scientists, politic theorists, and even modern self-help gurus. He reminds us that the truth isn't only up there in some higher world, it's right here in the messy details of everyday life, if we learn how to look at it. Look, you've already wasted at least 5 minutes of your life on this video. You might as well stick around for the end. But before that, I'd like to kindly invite you to join my Patreon. It's basically the video diary of all my crazy ideas and behind the scenes. So, if Aristotle was all about keeping your feet on the ground, René Descartes is the guy who tells you to doubt even about the ground you're standing on. He is the philosopher of the radical doubt, the one who said, What if everything I believe is wrong? What if the world I see is just a dream? What if some evil demon is tricking me right now? Descartes basically invents the ultimate existential paranoia, but he does it for a reason: to find something so certain that nothing, not even a demon, can shake it. And where does he find it? In the most famous line in all of philosophy: cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. You can doubt the word, you can doubt your body, but you can't doubt the very act of doubting. So if you're thinking, then you must exist. And that tiny rock of certainty becomes the foundation on which he wants to rebuild all knowledge. And here's the revolution. With the tiny phrase, Descartes places the ego at the center of everything. Before him, reality had kind of a built-in order: the cosmos, nature, God. After him, everything has to pass through the subject. Even God's existence, in a strange way, needs the cogito's permission, because the only path to God is through the certainty of my own thinking. So basically, God exists because I think that he exists, therefore he exists, something like that. And this is why Descartes is often called the father of modernity. He turns philosophy inside out, no longer starting with the word and trying to reach the truth, but starting with the self and reconstructing the universe from that point. And this move creates a new problem that will haunt centuries of thought. He split between the object and the subject. If all I know for sure is my thinking, how do I ever reach the external world? How do I bridge the gap between the self and what lies outside it? From Kant to Heidegger to phenomenology and postmodernism, philosophy becomes, in one way or another, a struggle with this inheritance, trying to escape or reframe the very subject-object framework that Descartes built. But Descartes isn't just the philosopher of doubt. He's also the father of modern science. He insists that nature isn't chaos. It's a machine that runs on clear mathematical laws. If we use our reason properly, we can uncover those laws and master the world. This is the mindset that fuels modern physics, engineers, and technology. Every time you use GPS or a computer, you're living in Descartes' world. And of course, he leaves us with the mind-body problem. He splits reality into substances: res cogitans, the thinking mind, and res extensa, the extended material world. It sounds neat until you ask, okay René, but how exactly does an immaterial thought make my very material arm move? And the thing is that he never solved this problem, and we are still wrestling with it today in philosophy of mind, neurosciences, and even in AI. What makes Descartes so revolutionary is that he flips philosophy inside out. For Plato and Aristotle, the starting point was the word, and the job of philosophy was to rise to truth. For Descartes, on the other hand, the starting point is the self, the inner act of thinking. From that single certainty, he wants to reconstruct the whole universe. This is like philosophy's Big Bang, an explosion that launched modern thought into a whole new dimension. Descartes matters because he shows us both the power and the danger of radical doubt. He forces us to stop taking things for granted and to ask, what can I know for sure? And even if the answer is only that I exist as a thinking being, well, sometimes one solid truth is all you need to start changing the world. Immanuel Kant might be one of the most intimidating names in the whole philosophy, but in his hometown of Königsberg, he was basically a celebrity. He was so punctual on his daily walks that people said you could set your watch by him. Imagine being so consistent that the whole city organizes time around your schedule. That's Kant, a man of reason to the very second. But behind this almost comical punctuality was a thinker with the craziest ambition in history: to rebuild all of philosophy as one gigantic system of reason. He wanted to explain everything: science, morality, politics, beauty, through pure rational structure. That's why his three great works are called critics: the critic of pure reason, the critic of practical reason, and the critic of judgment. Together, they are like the trilogy of reason. Star Wars, but with a fewer lightsabers and a way more footnotes. And it didn't come so easily. For 10 years, Kant basically went silent. He had been writing very conventional philosophy when he first read David Hume, responsible for awaking him from his dogmatic slumber. Hume had shown that our confidence in cause and effect, in science itself, had no rational foundation. For a decade, Kant disappeared into his study, thinking, rethinking, obsessing. When he finally emerged, it was with The Critique of Pure Reason, a book so dense that even professional philosophers admit they struggled to get it through. But its core idea is simple and revolutionary. It's not the mind that adapts to reality. Reality adapts to the mind. Space, time, cause, necessity, they aren't out there. They are lenses our mind uses to structure experience. And this was his Copernican revolution. And it changed philosophy forever. It is very radical. Kant makes the human subject the condition of experience itself. We can never know thing in itself, the world as it exists independently from us. What we know is always the world as it appears through the structure of our mind. In other words, we are not just living in reality, we are living in a reality already filtered and framed by us. This single, simple move sets the stage for all modern philosophy, from German idealism to phenomenology, to postmodernism, to existentialism. But Kant doesn't just stop at knowledge. In the Critique of Practical Reason, he asks, how should we live? And there he gives us the categorical imperative. Act only on principles you'd want everyone else to follow. No exceptions, no excuses. Freedom, for Kant, doesn't mean I do whatever I want. It means, on the contrary, following a law that you give to yourself, a law rooted in reason. For example, if lying works only when others tell the truth, then you can't universalize lying, so it's immoral. This makes ethics not about consequences or feelings, but about rational consistency. And it gives every human being dignity, because each person is a rational agent capable of legislating moral law for themselves. And then comes the third critique, the critique of judgment, where Kant surprises us by talking about beauty. For him, beauty is what happens when the word or faculties are in harmony, when form and freedom meet in a way that feels universal but without a concept. Think for a moment about standing before a sunset or a symphony. You can't explain it in logical terms, but you feel that everyone else should see the beauty as well. In a way, Kant makes beauty a bridge between nature and freedom, between the world as it is and the moral world as it ought to be. Finally, Kant is also a political thinker. He basically anticipated most of European Union ideas. He just hoped it would work one day for the whole world. His motto was, humans as ends in themselves, never as mere means. Without Kant, we wouldn't have the modern language of human rights, the idea of universal dignity, or even the philosophical backbone of democracy. His influence runs through law, politics, and international relations, the very idea of a world where freedom and equality are principles, not just dreams. So yes, Kant was punctual to the point of comedy. A man who spent 10 years in silence, then dropped suddenly 3 of the heaviest books philosophy has ever seen. But in those pages, he gave us a new way to understand knowledge, morality, and even beauty. If Plato gave us ideals, Aristotle gave us method, and Descartes gave us the ego, Kant gave us the system, a universe ordered by reason itself. And he reminds us that philosophy isn't just about abstract puzzles. It's about finding the principles that let human beings live with freedom, dignity, and meaning. If you are into Kant, I made a lot of videos about him because I'm also obsessed with punctuality. Just kidding, my PhD is actually about him, so make sure to check out all his videos on my channel. If Kant was the man of punctuality and perfect systems, Martin Heidegger was the opposite. He wasn't the kind of guy you could set your watch by, unless you wanted your watch to break down in an existential crisis. Heidegger was basically the philosopher who thought the entire history of philosophy had gone wrong since the very beginning, and he was here to reset the whole thing. Ambitious? Definitely. A little dramatic? Absolutely. But that's Heidegger. Here's the problem as he saw it. Ever since Descartes, philosophy had been obsessed with the subject-object split. First there is me, the subject, then there is the world, out there, and somehow philosophy has to build a bridge between them. Heidegger looked at the whole setup and said, nope, wrong question, let's start earlier. His starting point wasn't the subject, but what he called Dasein, literally being here and there. That's you, me, all of us, but not as isolated egos floating in space. Dasein is always already in the world, thrown into it, involved with it, caring about it. Before we start analyzing objects or asking how knowledge works, we are already living, acting, relating. And this changes everything. It means philosophy shouldn't be about abstract categories or systems, but about the question of being itself. What does it mean to be? We've been so busy analyzing beings, things, objects, substances, that we forgot to ask the most basic question, the meaning of being. Heidegger wanted to bring philosophy back to this forgotten ground. In Being and Time, his great and notoriously difficult book, he describes how Dasein lives. We are thrown into a world not of our choosing, surrounded by tools, relationships, and habits. Most of the time, we drift in the everyday, what he calls the day, conforming, chatting, scrolling TikTok. Okay, he didn't say that, but you get the idea. But then something breaks, the tool stops working or anxiety creeps in. And suddenly we are confronted with the deeper truth of our existence. That truth is that our life is finite. Death isn't some event at the end of life. It shapes us here and now. And the only way to live authentically is to face it, to own our mortality, and to stop hiding in the crowd. Heidegger also takes on technology, long before Silicon Valley existed. For him, the danger of technology isn't just about machines or gadgets. It's a way of seeing the world where everything, including humans, is reduced to resources, standing by to be used. He warns us that this mindset blinds us to the very deeper mystery of being, turning life into efficiency spreadsheets and production quotas. Not a bad warning for the age of algorithms and AI, if you think about it. Of course, Heidegger is one of the most controversial figures in philosophy because of his political choices. His affiliation with Nazis cast a long shadow, and that makes reading him uncomfortable, as it should. But even with the darkness, his impact on 20th century thought is enormous. Phenomenology, existentialism, postmodernism, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, Derrida, they all are reacting to Heidegger in some way. So why does Heidegger matter? Because he breaks the spell of subject versus object, reminding us that we are not detached minds looking at the world, but beings already immersed in it, already engaged, already finite. So if Plato gave us ideas, Aristotle gave us method, Descartes gave us the ego, and Kant gave us the system, Heidegger gives us the crack in the system. Namely, the reminder that philosophy begins not with abstractions, but with existence itself, with the strange, fragile, terrifying, and beautiful fact that we are here, now, for a little while. So here we are, 5 philosophers, 5 revolutions in the thought, 5 completely different ways of looking at the world. Together, they don't just form a list of great thinkers. They are the spine of our intellectual history. Every time we ask what's real, how we should live, what it means to be free, what it means to be human, we are speaking their language, wrestling with their questions. Philosophy is not a museum of dead ideas. It's a dialogue that still shapes the way we see politics, science, art, and even technology today. Philosophy is important not because it gives us final answers, but because it forces us to keep asking the hardest questions. Who we are, how should we live, what does it mean to exist? So I gave you 5 philosophers with their 5 different paths. Now it's your turn. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Ivan and this is Empirical, the Academy of Philosophy and Fine Arts.